Hello everyone, welcome back. So today we're going to continue from the this and constructors that we had a look at in the previous video and look at a concept called composition, as well as talk briefly about using set and get methods and what they can be called as well, because I think I've mentioned this a few times within programming that there are so many different programming classes and programming languages even, that a lot of the way we term things can be one or two or three different ways to say the same thing. So we'll get to that when we get started. So let's get to it. So now we're going to look at this in more detail. So I'm going to type it out as I'm going along. First, we need to address a few things. So we have our set and get methods that we've been calling just set and get methods, but actually the set method is called a mutator method, which means it mutates the data, it changes the data, it modifies the data, and then it sets it. And then a get method is also called an accessor method, so it accesses the data, and even though it accesses both of them, set and get private instance variables, what it does is it shields the client code, and then you can put in within the set and get methods, you can put in different validity checks. It's a sign of good software engineering. So if you can do everything from the set and get methods from your mutator and your accessor methods, then you can focus on just those two as validity checking to see whether yes, it's good to set this in this particular way, otherwise we're going to throw an exception, or return it in a specific format that's accessing it. So there's also another type of method that's within the code called a predicate method, and it returns either a true or false, and that would be kind of, let's say for instance, if you have an array list and you want to know before you do anything whether it's empty or not. So you say array list, whatever the array list name is, dot is empty, and that's called your predicate method. So now we're going to look at three different classes, and we're going to do a date class, an employee class, and an employee test class, and we are going to have plenty of private instance variables and checking throughout. So if I do the date class first, you should see the screen. 1 second now. I'm going to type out some stuff and then you'll see it in a minute. See you in a second. So here we have our date class. I've written out a little bit, not too much, because I want to write it out as I'm going along. And we have our three instance variables, our month, our date, and our year. So that is going to be obvious because that's what shows the date. We have an array as well called of type int called days per month, and we have an iterator list. So we already know this type of list that we have across. So because it's zero-based counting as well, our first element is going to be 0. So 0, and then 31 days in January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. So we'll come to leap years in a bit, but this is our array for the moment. It's private, so it's not accessible outside of the date class just yet. We do have a constructor down here called public date, so anytime you instantiate the date object somewhere else, it's going to call this constructor. The default constructor is no longer available because we have created our own, which we mentioned in the previous video, which is linked below. And now we're going to do some further checks. So we have our if statements. I've actually put up a video from Bill Gates talks about programming. It's in a new playlist that I've created. It's quite interesting because he basically talks about life being a series of if statements. So if you can get those down, then that's the start of your programming journey. Anyway, it's quite a nice video to watch. So if we have our if, then, and then we have day. So what is the construction for a day needs to be? So it's going to be less than or equal to, less than or equal to 0. or, which is this operator, or day is also going to be greater than days per month, and we're going to put month in there. And we need to also say that it's not going to be, which we haven't really used that much, this not operator, not going to be equal to 2, and day equal to 29, which is our leap year thing, which we were just talking about. So we have 3 brackets, make sure all our brackets are there. We have a spelling mistake here, days per month. And then we have what happens then through this, we throw a new exception, and that's also similar to here. So I'm going to copy this line all together and then just adjust it for my purposes. So we're going to say day, in this case it's day, in the previous one it's month, day, and then maybe say here, out of range for the specified month and year. Perfect. So that's going to be the first one. Then we're also going to need another, because we have check if days are in range for the month, and then we have to check if it's a leap year, right? So this is going to be our check here, if day in range for a month, and then this will be our if for check for check for range for a month. And now we can, I'm going to copy this, it's easier, these are the little hacks that you learn in work pretty fast, and then you can tab across a lot of stuff as well. And they should all be in the same kind of order as well. And this will check for leap year. So the rule for a leap year is that it's divisible, and day is 29. It's divisible by 4. So the rhyme goes first in February, once in 4, February has but 1 day more. Okay, so 30 days had September, April, June, and November. All the rest of 31 except for February, once in 4, when February has but 1 day more. So it only happens every 4 years. So if it's divisible, it has to be divisible by 4 then. So we have to have our if to match that. So if I say if month is equal to 2, because it has to be February, which we know already, and the day is going to be equal to 29, because that was in our previous we couldn't have it that way, so this is now yes, we want it that way. And then our not our year cannot be equal to 0, or we'll bring that down to the next line so you can see it, or year equals to 4 equals to 0, and year also 100 0. Now we have to check all our brackets. So here we have our next one. So we have too many. This is where some coding problems come in. But you can see it highlights when I do it, and then the color changes. So if I was missing one, you can see that it's got an underline here. Let's say if I missed out all of them. And then you can see here that this highlights when this is correct. this one highlights for this one, and this one highlights for this one. In really large code, it's a little bit more tricky because you might need to scroll all the way up to see. But that's why we break things into nice little chunks. And if you've got good architecture in your code, then those divide and conquer principles will come through, which I spoke about in a previous video with the divide and conquer. That's why we do it. So now we have to put in our exception. So day plus day, and then we say out of range for specified month and year exactly. So it's going to be the same. And now, as always, because we're in the constructor and here we have our private instance variables, so when we call the constructor object from another class, we're constructing that object, but we need to know what to access because we have no access to it at the moment. So we need to use the this keyword, which I spoke about in the previous video. So I'm going to say this dot month equals month. So that would be the month that's called here when you construct it. And then also we're going to do the exact same for date and year. So So now we can print out dot print date object constructor for date percentage s, percentage n, and then we pass through this lovely keyword called this. And now if we see here that that's the end of the constructor, and so now we can make another method perhaps here, and we're going to say public string to string, which we've done in the previous one as well. Return string.format, and similar way to the previous. So we have our %d slash %d slash %d, and that is going to be our month, day, year. Great. Now, do we have all our connectors? Yes, we do. So at the moment we just have the one class, which is the date class, and that's going to be called in our employee class. So I'm going to pause the video now again, write out some code, and then go through the bits that we need to remember. Okay. So now we have our new class called it's a public class, so it's accessible somewhere else. It's called employee. Now we have 4 instance variables. Now these are reference type variables. So we have our private string first name, private string, I'm going to say last name, and then we make reference to an object called date, and it's birth date and hire date. So with this, then it's showing that a class can have instance variable references to objects. So we're actually making a reference to an object. So this is why it's called a reference. So the previous things that we had looked at were the different types of date formats. So obviously now we need a constructor. So if we call the employee object in another class, we need to identify what we need to bring across, and because these are private, then I presume we have to access them in some way. So we have public employee, and then we have our string first name. Now you can obviously call these whatever you want because we're going to assign them to this in a minute. So string last name, and then obviously date, birth date, and date, hire date, and opening close brackets. Now we need to do the normal this we'll do it in order. Usually it's better to do it in order so that you can see first name. So when we're looking here, when we call the constructor, it's really important just to get this. So you have our string first name here. So when employee, lowercase employee equals new employee, and then we have to put in our parameter variables, we're putting in to the formula in here first name, and then here it doesn't mean anything at the moment. It's just a string type, that's it, a reference type string. So now we have first name and we're assigning it to this first name, so we're assigning it to this variable within this class. So then if we copy these, we're going to do the same for our last name and the rest. So when you're copying across these things, to make sure, and usually it's a good idea to make sure that they're all highlighted when you click on them, because then you know that you have used them correctly. So you can see here, if I highlight this, this highlights, which is really nice. And then we're going to rob from here, because we're also going to use this in this. But we're going to obviously change what it's going to say here. So we're going to have %s then, and it's going to be 4 different %s's: %s, hired, %s, birthday, %s. Maybe if we put this here. And now, because it's 4 different ones, you can guess what it is. Last name. Oh, well, last name first. First name, birth date, and hire date. Oh, hire date should be first. Hire date, birth date, and now to remove the comma. Very important to keep them all correct. If I bring this down to the next line, it might be easier to read. Also with this, keep it within the page. So here also we have some space that we can get rid of, because this can lead to dangling if else problem later on if we have the incorrect amount of curly brackets, but that's another story. Now we're going to create an employee test. If I go here to my date and create my new class, this is going to be the entry point to the program, so we can tick the yes. As usual, it needs to be a capital for class. And now it's already created it for us. So what are we going to do? We're going to take in some information and then assign it. So if we have date, birth equals new date, and then put in what it's expecting. So if we go to date, in our constructor, it's going to expect a month, day, and a year, and they're all integer types, so they're all full rounded numbers. So we say 12, 19, I'm going to say 44. And then date hire equals new date, and let's say we started on the 1st of, let's say 1st of March this year, 2020. And semicolon as always. Now we have our employee data to go in. So employee equals new employee. What does employee expect? We go to employee and we have a look, and it expects 2 strings, first name, last name, and 2 dates, birthday and hire date. So if we now say first name is going to be Bob. And the next name is going to be Ruby, after some of my dogs at home. And then we just make reference to birth and hire, just like that, because we have here already assigned birth and hire. And then if we, all we have to do then is print out our system.out.println and print out employee. And there we go. So we should have two here, and if we save it, run it, see what happens. Yay! So you can see here when the date object constructor for date is called, when it's called a second time, and this is important to know because for each date type, this is known as composition. So if something has so a car has a steering wheel, it has a clutch, it has, and you can call car multiple times based on these different objects. So also with employee, if I had multiple employees, let's try it and see what happens. So if I have another object employee, we'll say employee 1 then, and I want to print out employee 1. Not a great naming convention, but we'll come to that later. And if we say Frankie's my new dog at home, Ruby was the last one. And then we can also, they're at the same birth and hire date, so we can also add maybe 2 more and see what happens. Birth 1, hire 1, birth 1, hire 1. So each time we have an object, then it's going to be called another time. So let's have a look. Yay! So this is each time that this is called, it shows it up. And then if I also put in from date, we have our system.out here in our constructor. So we can also take this piece of code and put it into employee, where the constructor is called employee, object constructor for employee, and show that as well. So you can see how many times based on how many times that it was used. So if we go back to EmployeeTest and show it up here, we have for each one employee, we need to use 2 different date object references. So with reference types, we have certain things that are reference types. So string, we already know is a reference type because it's not a primitive type. So the primitive types that we spoke about were int, char, byte, bool, etc. And then we also spoke about the boxing that we can do with int. So, and then we need to unbox it so we can use methods for integer. But we'll come to that again later on as well. So that's it for today. I guess that's pretty straightforward. In the next video, we'll look at enum types again in more detail. I hope you liked the video. Like if you do, comment below, and please subscribe to my channel. I love doing them, so I hope it's useful, and stay safe. Bye.